So I want to welcome you to the class of inquiry. This class is really an introduction to the science of theology. And so we're going to be looking at the development of theology because it is something that is the invention of Christianity. And we're going to see how it evolved through the ages. And our particular interest is in the growth and development of what we would call Catholic theology, or I like to call it historic Christianity. And so there have been many great minds in every generation who we would call divines in the old language that we have come to call theologians. And there's an enormous, voluminous amount of material, and no person who is a student of theology is going to be able to read all of it. In fact, you'd be fortunate if you read like 0.0005% of it. There's just so much out there. And what I've attempted to do when I designed this course is to be able to give a general introduction to what theology is, and boil it down to a 26 or 27 week course. This is what you have signed up for. The original purpose for this course of study was to prepare adults for the sacrament of confirmation, or baptism and or confirmation. And so over the years, I've been teaching this course, and Steve Smith went through it in preparation for his confirmation. And I think that was in 2008, 2009.
I think it was earlier.
It could have been earlier. Yeah, it was some time ago. And then last year, and then Polly did it, took this course. Was that that might have been 2008 or 9. But it was a few years ago. And then Steve and Nancy most recently took it last year. And so they were confirmed as a result of completing this material. But the class is not only for people who are looking forward to being confirmed or considering confirmation in our church, but it's also one that is for anyone who is interested in deepening their faith. Now, I know, like Polly was confirmed as a child in the Roman Catholic Church, so she had no need to be confirmed, but she took the class because she wanted to have a more adult understanding of the faith. And so the class is open to those individuals. And like Kristen, you've already received the sacrament of confirmation. There's no need for you to have to be confirmed again. And then in your case, Steve, we'll be able to take care of what wasn't finished years ago. So right now, we're looking towards your confirmation as you complete the course. And there might be a few others who will be coming. But that's how it's always been, why this class has been offered. But in the development of the Cyprian School of Theology, which we are initiating and starting, we have a program called the Permanent Deacon Study Program. And so that orientation is tomorrow for that. And those are for those people who are exploring and considering the vocation of serving the church as a permanent deacon. And so this particular course will satisfy that one course that the school wants, and that is an introduction to theology or systematic theology. If you're like Tony's here for that purpose, and I believe that's it, yeah. So for students, and we'll probably have a few more next week from the diaconal program that'll be coming. The students who are studying for the Diaconal Formation Program will also be reading at the same time through the several months a required text, and I'll let you know. I'll bring in a copy of that. Steve has already read it. It's the McBrien book. So that will be the text for this course of study if you're in the Diaconal Formation Program. But any of you who are just here for your own interest, or you're here only for confirmation, I shouldn't say only, that's a great thing to be here for, then certainly you can make use of any of the books that are recommended, and you may want to get this book by McBrien, which is a great introduction and explanation of Catholicism. You just finished reading it. What was your thoughts about that, Steve?
Well, I was going to say it's not only a great overview, but it's hefty enough to be used as a deadly weapon too.
Oh, it's
a big book.
Yeah, you can anchor the Titanic with it. Yeah, yeah. So.
Hope it has lots of pictures in it.
Yeah. So I want you to take out the first handout I've given you called Introduction to Theology, so we can just take a look at the schedule so you can know what to expect in this course. The one thing that we'll talk about quite a bit in this class, but particularly tonight we're going to be starting to get into it, is there is an aspect of our human experience that is difficult to explain, and yet it is a universal reality. When we talk about the aspect of human life that has to do with surviving, we pretty much know that we have to eat and we have to have a means of nourishment, and so we can study. The study of that would be economics. And so we also know that we live in a society in which we need to have agreements with one another, how we're going to behave towards one another. Okay, so that's ethics and the development of civil law. And so human experience is wide, it's varied, but there are many things that we all share in common as human beings. So one of the observations about the nature of our humanity is that we have this idea and we've invented this thing. Oh, I can't move out of the way. We've invented this thing called religion. And it's a big part of our human experience. And religious experience is difficult to be able to define, but it seems to be a universal experience. As I refer to it in terms of an individual person, I refer to it as human spirituality. We seem to have somewhere within us an awareness and a consciousness of something that is unseen, and yet we feel related to that unseen reality, which we usually regard as being much greater than ourselves. And we assign this unseen spiritual reality, the most common word that we use for it is the name God or divinity. And so all cultures, all societies have religion. There's not a culture that has, or civilization that came into existence without religion. And even though the various cultures and societies would have various ways of expressing this feeling, for lack of a better word, this feeling that we have within us, there seems to be certain general things that are the same with all human spiritual experience and religion. And we'll be talking about those. So this is where we begin. We begin with an experience. One of the things that I discovered very early on in my own faith formation was that I went through a spiritual crisis in my life as a young adult. I had finished my formal theological education, and then things happened, and I really despaired of my faith. I was like in free fall. I fell into the abyss of doubt, which now looking back was a really great spiritual experience to have because it was a defining moment for me. But it was a moment in which I entered into a very deep depression because I had been very religious all my life. And I even chose to pursue my higher education in the field of theology and religion. And so now I realized that I had become agnostic and I had lost my faith. And that was a real crisis for me. And one of the things that happened is that my whole life began to collapse around me as a result of this. And so it was a very dark period of time. And I thought quite a bit about death. Not that I was contemplating suicide, I never did that. But death was a frightening reality, and I didn't want to look at death in the way our culture does by denying death. But the old ideas about death that I had when I was brought up in a religious home, it just wasn't working anymore. I wasn't convinced. And I was looking for some way out of the faith crisis that I was involved in. So here I was, and things were getting worse. And finally, I had a conversation with myself, kind of like the prodigal son. He came to his senses in one translation, or he came to himself. So I had a moment where I came to myself and I had to ask myself certain questions. And that is, am I happier now than when I was religious? Well, no. And what does my life look like now in comparison of when I had faith? Well, my life, I was becoming very withdrawn from relationships, and I was very depressed, so I wasn't giving life out to people. I was just sinking in my own, in the quagmire of my own doubts and troubles and concerns and worries and fear and all those kinds of things. So I never did discover, I could not answer the question, does God exist? Because I didn't know, and I really didn't think anyone else knew either. So all the arguments failed to take hold and satisfy me. So it really came down to me asking these questions of myself. And so at that moment, I had to make a decision. I had to make a choice. I was either going to live the rest of my life without religion, find something else, or I was going to be religious. So I chose to be religious. And the reasons I chose to be religious was, first of all, I was convinced it was the human thing to do. That I can't escape my sense of spirituality. I cannot escape religion because it's intrinsic to my humanity, and I had to affirm that. And I could no more repress or suppress my religiosity, or this thing within me that I would call religion, than I could my sexuality. So my spirituality was just as intrinsic to my humanity as my sexuality. Yes?
So the real popular thing to say these days is, I'm spiritual, not religious.
Yeah.
So how, in your experience, how closely intertwined is religion as an integral part of being spiritual?
Well, I put it this way, and I'll get into this later on in the lesson, that by definition, human beings are spiritual, from my point of view. Spirituality is intrinsic to our humanity in as much, as I said just earlier, as our sexuality or other aspects of our humanity. Religion is the social expression of that inner spirituality, because my spirituality is my subjective experience. It's what I know I'm experiencing within me. Now note, I'm not getting into beliefs or ideas. I'm just talking about experience. So religion is a social phenomenon. So you have a spirituality, just like you have a sexuality. I have a spirituality and a sexuality. So how can we relate our inner spiritual experience with one another outwardly? Well, we come together and we create a language that is not only words, but actions, rituals, whatever it may be that we create so that we can talk about this inner experience with us. That's religion. Religion is the outward expression between two or more people about their inner life and inner experience. Religion takes me out of my isolation.
So it's almost the same as to say I'm spiritual but not religious. It's almost like saying I'm sexual but not married.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sexual, but I want to live to myself, so I'm not going to have sex with anybody. Yeah, it's exactly right. And if you say, and by my definition, if you say I'm spiritual and not religious, it just means you're just keeping it inside yourself and you're not sharing your spirituality with anyone. The moment you are sharing and having common spiritual experiences, that's religion, whatever it may be. And humans have been doing it for a long time. It's very old that we have been doing this. And some, quite frankly, are better at it than others. So that's why we have certain people arise that seem to have ways of inspiring this part of our humanity. And those are religious leaders or spiritual leaders that emerge from time to time in history. So I made a decision to be religious because I thought it's consistent with my humanity. I still didn't know whether God existed with any kind of certitude, and I felt like I couldn't know that. Yes.
So does that mean you were going to fake it till you made it, or go through the steps and hope something comes?
Right. So what I chose to do is acknowledge my ignorance, that I could not know whether God existed or not with any certainty. There was no way to demonstrate it. There was no way for me in my tiny humanity that could do that. But I could practice religion. I can make a choice deliberately to practice religion, and then see what the fruit of that would be. So I would get myself out of the abyss that I was falling into by acting religious.
Is that akin to Augustine saying, I believe in order to know? Yes,
it is. That's right. And those words resonated with me. So, so religion and faith is a choice. You choose to go with this inner experience, but the inner experience has priority over the choice, because you have to recognize there's something within you, a yearning, a kind of, for lack of a better word, a consciousness that is deeper than the consciousness that we normally function under. So we have religious experiences. And so I decided that I was going to practice religion at this point. Now remember, I had despaired of everything I had been taught and all of that, so I was in a sense starting over. So I chose, I could be unreligious or religious. I chose to be religious, and my rationale was because it's part of my humanity. I can't escape it any more than I can escape my sexuality. I always make the comparison between spirituality and sexuality, and you might think I'm obsessed with sexuality, but I think sexuality is one of those aspects that we kind of objectify and look at, and we know what we're talking about there. That's an experience. We don't understand the experience other than the obvious, we need to procreate. But beyond that, we don't understand it. And then, so I make that comparison as a way of analogy to what spirituality is like.
But they both lie at the root of our very identity.
Yeah, they both are. Exactly. Oh, identity, what a mystery that is. So that having been my experience, I also was looking at it practically. And the practical was, a reason I chose religion is that I was happier being religious. And not only that, but being a religious person made me a better person. I was more engaged with people. So I saw that religion was actually a positive influence on my life, and I could see that without it, I was just becoming a withdrawn, ineffectual person. So I had practical reasons to be religious, and also I had to acknowledge that I had to embrace religion because that is a part of our collective humanity, and my spirituality is a part of my individual humanity. It is a reality. Why fight against it? It's the same as trying to fight against your sexuality. And that's why I can sometimes, with great sympathy, look upon those people who have a different sexual orientation and they struggle with that. I get that, you know, and it's kind of lame for, you know, religious leaders to sit there and say, just repress it. Well, you know, you want to act responsibly and ethically. But at the same time, if you have a certain orientation, that's your orientation. You can no more change that than you can change or just get rid of to say you're unspiritual. In fact, I don't know of anybody who says I'm proud of being unspiritual. You know, even atheists are trying to say we're spiritual too. So that is where I have been. Now, throughout the ages, there have been people who have, groups of people as well as individuals that have had very profound and dramatic religious experiences. This is a part of the human experience. I've never had a vision, but there have been enough people in history who have. And these visions have been transformative. And it was very real to them. Another spiritual religious experience was the early disciples seeing the resurrected Christ. They had an experience. It was transformative, it was radical, and it impacted them. So religious experience has priority in that is what happens first. We all have a spiritual experience. Whether we recognize it or not is another question. So what is theology? Theology, faith is putting trust in that inner religious impulse, spiritual impulse in you. You're going to go with it. You don't know for sure if it's real, but you're going to go with it. You make a choice. That's faith. And then you have an experience. And I've had religious experiences since. But I had to make the choice to be religious first. And so I've had spiritual experiences that are very powerful and very real. And you've had them too. And the thing is that theology is our ideas and thoughts about that experience. It is faith seeking understanding. We don't invent theology and then try to have a spiritual experience. We have a spiritual experience and then we try to understand it. And so that quest, that journey for understanding is called theology. In the case of the resurrection of Christ, which is one of the great, in the case of the resurrection of Christ, because that's an archetypal, that is a powerful religious experience that many people had, the resurrected Christ. The thing about the resurrected Christ, what was I going to say about that? The original disciples who were eyewitnesses of it, let's take Peter. We know Peter was a witness of this thing. Transformed him. And he could tell you what happened. He had a religious experience. He gave a testimony or a witness. This happened to me. I saw this. I felt this. And he had the story down. He experienced Jesus personally. And that's been left behind for us to look at. But there's another man who lived in the early church who didn't have the same kind of experience as Peter, but had a religious experience.
I'm freezing. Oh, no.
I don't know if I would say, because I'm saying there is an experience that we can build on. That is an actual experience. So it's, I'm not sure if I understand.
Well, I mean, it sounds like in you really, I don't want to derail this.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Tony.
In the Roman Church, their platform for theology is detailed in the United States Conference of Bishops. What will be the platform here in this program?
Well,
is there even one?
Yeah, there is, and it's historic Christianity. Okay. So what theologians are doing is talking about an experience and trying to understand the experience. So the experience takes priority over theology. If you don't have the experience, you have nothing to think about.
And that's really contradictory to the whole Roman experience. experience because they say you cannot do that.
Well, that may be true from some Catholics. I do think that what I'm articulating here was something we hold in common with Roman Catholics. So, but there is this idea among Christians in general, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, that you have to have the right ideas, and then you'll have the religious experience. And you distrust experience. Where the way I approach it is I believe in the experience that I'm having. I think there's something real going on. I don't understand it, so I try to find some way of understanding it, and that's my quest. And I have found answers that have been very meaningful and the best I could find in Christianity, and in particular, Catholic Christianity. So I made a decision that I would be religious, which meant that I got to go back and study theology. It wasn't just about I was going to go to church on Sunday and pray. I was going to practice, and I was going to pursue it with everything in me to understand the experience I was having. So that is what theology is. Theology is trying to articulate and understand the experience we have. But the experience is bigger than anything we can say about it. That's why theology grows and develops over time. So we are standing on the shoulders of 2,000 years of prior generations who have been thinking about this and trying to come to terms with it. So theology, good theology is dynamic. It's able to adapt, develop, and evolve and change as we grow, just like everything that's growing and changing and evolving. Why not religion and theology? So there is development in religion. So we're not stuck just with a museum piece of the past. Although there are many people of faith, many Christians that just want, that their Christianity is a museum piece. It's someone else's experience from long ago, and we're just preserving that. And I'm just going to agree with that other person's experience. You know, those saints of the past. But the reality is I'm just as human as Peter or Paul or Augustine, and I'm having my own spiritual experience, and maybe I can think about it in ways building on what they have done, and I can make a contribution to our understanding. The fact is we understand very little about our experience, religious experience. So we have to be very tentative about theology. It is a growing. Some people want to lock it into a series of propositions. You must believe this, 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 and this, and then you're in. You know, and you can get people to say it, but do they really believe it? Do they even know what belief is? What is it to believe? You know, yeah.
What the demons in hell have better theology than we do. What good does it do them?
Oh yeah, that sounds like C.S. Lewis. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I want you to look at this first sheet and see where I have faith seeking understanding. I believe that's Augustine who said that. So theology is faith seeking understanding. And this is what we're going to do in this course. We all have faith. We all have spiritual or religious experience. We want to expand that, and we want to understand it as best as we can. This course of study, do you have it? Introduction to Theology? Yeah, okay. This is why you, by the way, get a big binder like this, because there's going to be handouts like this every week. It'll be a tome by the time you're done. You're going to feel like a theologian when you're done with this class. Okay. This course of study is designed to introduce the inquirer to the beliefs and practices of the Catholic religion, especially in how it is expressed in the life of our particular household of faith within the Ecumenical Catholic Communion. This study will seek to survey the origin and development of Catholic tradition, spirituality, and theology, as well as its organizational evolution as an institution within human society. The present course is offered as a 24-week series. Well, it turned out I added a few things. It's going to be 27, I believe. Well, you'll see in a moment. That is divided into 2 semesters. The fall semester begins at 7 p.m., or was supposed to start at 7 p.m. on Friday, September 9th, 2016, and will meet on successive Friday evenings until November 18th, 2016. Following the fall semester, there will be a 6-week holiday season break. I'm not even going to try to compete with your holiday. Classes will resume at the start of the spring semester on Friday, January 6th, 2017. There's another thing. And will meet on successive Fridays until April 28th, 2017. Boy, I didn't have Catherine proof this. She would have caught that. Those adults who complete this course of study will be eligible to become candidates for baptism and or confirmation if they should so desire and if they have not yet received these sacraments. The class will also count toward the fulfillment of the required study in systematic theology for the, students who are enrolled in the Permanent Deacon Program of the St. Cyprian School of Theology. However, the inquiry class is open to all who would seek a greater understanding of Catholicism, especially as it is practiced at St. Matthew Church and the Ecumenical Catholic Communion. Yes, Polly.
Who is Saint Cyprian?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to give you a paper on St. Cyprian.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he's one of the great bishops of the early church, and he was a martyr. The Romans killed him. But he's one of our heroes, and I'm going to hand out a biography of him for you next week. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked, Polly. Now, if you look at the course outline, this is the schedule. So, human spirituality, the phenomenon of religion, which we're not going to finish tonight. It'll spill over to next week. And those of you taking the class before know that that's not an unusual experience. Yeah.
You always make time for questions.
That's right. Lots of discussion, hopefully. Week 2 will be cosmology. It addresses how we view and understand creation and existence of the world, that is the universe. And the question is, why does anything exist at all? By the way, we'll never be able to answer that question. The week after that is we're going to talk about a basic spiritual experience that we call revelation, where someone feels they're receiving something from beyond. So we'll talk about revelation. It's the human encounter with the divine. Week 4, sacred scripture, the place of the Bible in Catholicism. And you'll be introduced to, here's a weird word, hermeneutics. Have you heard that word before? It is the science of biblical interpretation. We got all these ancient texts. How are we going to interpret them? How are we going to understand them? Then week 5, we'll be introduced to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call salvation history, the people of God, and the idea of the sacred covenant. And guess what? Week 6, no class, because I'm going to be at the Synod. Yeah, so this is the calendar. So be sure to note these things on your personal calendar. Week 7, the Old Testament. We will continue with the Old Testament and cover the Hebrew prophets and the messianic hope that evolves out of the message of the Hebrew prophets. That leads us to week 8, to the New Testament documents. Then week 9, the New Testament, the Christ event, the Jesus movement, and the historical Jesus. We'll be looking at that. Then week 10, no class. Sorry about that, but I'll be in the Philippines at that time. But I'll be back in time for week 11, and we do the New Testament, the development of Christian theology, and it begins with St. Paul the Apostle. That's what we'll do this fall. That's all we're going to do. Here ends the fall semester. And then the classes will resume, if you turn the page, in the spring semester, and we will continue the New Testament and early Christianity, and we'll get into what is called Christology. Christology is what we think about the person of Jesus. It's all about him. And Christianity always was about him. You can't have a Christless Christianity.
It has his name right in it.
Yeah, his name's right in it. And then once we've explored how to understand who Jesus was, and we're going to be led to the conclusion, based upon what the early church said, that he was somehow divine. We're not sure how that exactly is, but he's somehow divine. So then you get what comes next. How is he divine, and yet we have two other persons called divine, the Holy Spirit and the Father? Well, we get the Holy Trinity, and we're going to talk about that. That's a lot of fun, by the way. Then we get into the next area of theological inquiry called soteriology. It's based on the Greek word salvation. So we're going to be talking about, have you noticed how so many religions talk about salvation?
Yeah.
It's a big deal. But, I mean, think about it. Salvation. Well, what is it? What are we being saved from? How do we experience salvation? And for Catholics, salvation is a process that unfolds in your life. It is the activity of God in your heart. Okay, then week 15, soteriology, salvation part 2, concepts and images. Then we get in week 16 what we call ecclesiology, which is based on the Greek word for church, ecclesia, and we're going to talk about what is the church. Part 1, the Messianic community, the people of God, the body of Christ. So we'll explore that. Then the next week we'll come back and we have ecclesiology again, the church part 2, and we're going to talk about the apostolic ministry within the church. You know, those guys called bishops? We're going to find out what that's all about. Why is that part of church life? Then we get to week 18, Mary and the communion of saints. Which is a big part of Catholicism. Then, week 19, the church part 4, the liturgy and the liturgical year, the sanctification of time. So why do we do all this stuff called the liturgy? So we'll spend a lesson on that. Then we have week 20, we start the sacraments, part 1, moments of encounter with Christ, and you'll be introduced to sacramental theology. What do we mean when we talk about sacraments? Then week 21, we will then begin looking at each of the 7 sacraments. There are 7, I think you knew that. And we'll talk about baptism and confirmation, the Eucharistic meal, which is the sacrifice of the Mass, sacraments of restoration, which is reconciliation and anointing of the sick, sacraments of vocation, holy orders, and matrimony. After our series on the sacrament, we will go in week 22. We're already on St. Patrick's Day. Sorry, I'm going to have class on St. Patrick's Day. Are you Irish, Kristen?
Yes.
You're in trouble. Yeah, you have to be sober when you come here on that.
When she comes here, so bring whiskey with her.
But look, we're going to be doing pneumatology, which is about the Spirit. But we're not talking spirits. We're talking about the Spirit. And the charismata, or the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And then we get to week 23, eschatology, which means the last things. Basically, what's next after this life? And all the pain and grief of this life. What's next? I think it was in the homily last week. I finally figure it all out, and then you die. What's the point? Yeah. Okay, the last things, the second coming, the end of the age, life after death, what is heaven, hell, and purgatory. Remember purgatory? We don't talk about it that much anymore, but we still believe it somehow. What does that mean? Then week 24, moral theology. So we have all this religious belief and experience. So what are the implications for that and how we conduct ourselves and how we live? And that's moral theology. How shall we then live? Christian ethics, the gospel of compassion, the way of Jesus, the way of love and wisdom. And then week 25, note, it's Good Friday. There will be no class, but we'll all still be here at the church at Good Friday, right? We'll be practicing our religion on that day. And then week 26, church polity. How do we govern ourselves? The great conflict within the Catholicism of the second millennium. Conciliarism versus ultramontanism. And that is still an ongoing controversy in Catholicism to this day. Basically, it's the question, who has the final word? The Pope or the Ecumenical Council? That's still going on. And different popes have different styles. Pope Benedict was an ultramontanist. I'm mentioning that to you. The authority flows from the person of the Pope. But Pope Francis, and the reason why he's so controversial, is that he's not saying it, but he's talking like a conciliarist. you see. So even within Roman Catholicism, there is that tension going back and forth. And so we'll talk about the Council of Constance, in which conciliarism prevailed, and then later the First Vatican Council, when ultramontanism prevails. That's when the Pope became infallible. And then Vatican II and the resurgence of conciliarism, I put a question mark there. This is the time we're living in now today. Then week 27, we're going to talk about ecumenical Catholicism and the ecumenical Catholic communion. Who are we? Where do we come from? The other Catholics, the old Catholic movement, Roman Catholicism. So what's the difference? We'll be doing that. So this is kind of an overview of what you're going to be exposed to in this class. Each lesson builds on the lesson before. We're laying a foundation and we're building an edifice here, a theological edifice. So it is sequential. So if you miss a class, you can make it up. I'm happy to meet with you. I did that a couple times for Mike and Nancy last year, didn't I? And I came to their home and I can take you through the lesson and do it right there. Or you can, these are being recorded. So you can do, that's another way of doing it. So either way, you'll have every opportunity to get through this material. So what do you think so far? Yeah, hi Tony.
Okay, back to what I asked originally.
Yeah, what was that?
The platform, I'm still not clear. You said it's historical Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And you're teaching us historical Christianity, but will there be because everybody says this is historical, this is historical,
Yeah.
this is historical. So is there a platform, or is it just your version of historical, or does it come from a certain place of how you're teaching us?
Yeah. Okay. I hear what you're asking. This.
As long as I know.
Yeah. The theological point of view in this class would be Catholic. So, and we're going to learn what Catholicism is. So there is a body of belief or ideas about the Christian experience that comes from a group called Catholics. So this is from a Catholic perspective. I say historic Christianity because Catholicism is the oldest form of Christianity that's still around today. So I'm not teaching this from a Protestant point of view. And even though I'm strongly influenced by the Eastern Orthodox Church, and I will mention their influence on me as we go through this class, I see that as within the mainstream of the overall Catholic faith tradition. But I'm clearly a Western Christian. So most of the 95% of this is going to be what we share with Roman Catholics. So
just out of curiosity, you said that Catholicism is the oldest extant form of Christianity. Would you say that in the face of the Syriac churches?
Oh, no, I couldn't say that. Because, but I regard the Syriac churches as being Catholic.
Oh.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Coptics?
And the Coptic too. Because the Coptic church is as old as the Roman church. Yeah. Some people would say older. Yeah.
So
They're the
Western
Egyptians.
rather than Eastern.
Yeah. There's Eastern Christianity, which are the Greeks and the Syrians and the Egyptians and Armenians, and later it spreads up to Russia.
Are the Coptics not Egyptian?
Yeah, they're Egyptian. Coptic means Egyptian in Greek.
Okay.
So the word Coptic and the word Egyptian, same word in Greek. See, the Egyptians all became Christians. So the guys who built the pyramids, their descendants are still in Egypt, and they're called Coptic Christians. Even though they only make up,
A small percentage. No.
is it 6% of that population? It's because all these Arabs moved in and occupied Egypt. But the Arabs came much later, but the original Egyptians, the guys who built the pyramids, have been Christians since they embraced the faith back in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. And they're still there.
Would it have been one of the apostles that converted them?
Yeah, well, it's more than one person. But
Yeah.
but the Coptic Church looks to the evangelist Mark, who wrote the Gospel.
Oh,
Mark is their ancestor in the faith.
okay.
So they trace themselves back to Mark, and they call their leader a pope. You know, I can't remember the Coptic pope today, but the one that I saw was Pope Shenouda. And but he died a few years ago, and they had a change. So I don't remember the new ones. Printing for us for years here at St. Matthew's. He's a Coptic Christian.
We have a family across the street from us that are Coptic.
Yeah.
We go to St. Verona and something big there.
Yeah. So yeah. So anyway, I want to also bring to you your attention that I'm giving you a recommended reading list. This is just recommended. This is not something, you don't have to read any of these. But I was thinking about the human spirituality in the Christian context, and I thought these books would be useful to you. And so I bring that to your attention. Also, to answer your question further about, you were talking about the platform. I created this visual aid, because for me personally, I'm sorry about that. I know, I really am. For me personally, and I think it is the ideal of all Christians, is that my religion and my faith experience is what we call Christocentric. And in fact, Jesus, the person of Jesus, needs to be at the center of your faith. If not, it will lead to all kinds of excesses and problems. You know, he is the solid rock upon which we stand. Yeah.
What is the exact translation of the word Christ? Is it a Greek word?
Yeah, well, in English we say Christ.
Yeah.
In Greek it's Christos.
Okay.
You want to say that? Christos.
Christos.
Christos. Christos is the Greek word that means the anointed one, and it is the word that they use to translate the Hebrew, which is Messiah. You've heard Messiah before.
Oh, yeah.
So Messiah is the Aramaic or the Hebrew based on that, and Mashiach is how it's pronounced. Mashiach is
for
Messiah. We say Messiah. The Greeks translated it Christos, and then we just put Christ. So, which means the anointed one.
I remember Father Tony, when he was a priest with us, said once, people act like it's his last name. They say Jesus Christ as if Christ was his last name. It just made me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
He was so indignant, but I thought, well, what does it mean? So essentially you're saying Jesus the Anointed One.
That's right.
When you say Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's a title. So
Right.
yeah, another way it's put is in the New Testament, Christ Jesus, where the title comes first, and that makes it more like a title. But yeah, many people think it's his last name, like it's Jesus H. Christ, you know? No one went around taking attendance there in Nazareth at the school saying, Jesus Christ, are you here today? No. If anything, he would have been known as Yeshua Bar Yosef. Yeah. Jesus, son of Joseph. That's how he would have been known. Or Jesus of Nazareth, because that's either you were identified by your father's name, or you were identified by your location or by your trade. That's usually what happened. And last names, that would take almost 2 millennia before we got to having really last names locked in. So anyway, in this chart, I put Jesus at the center. And the idea is staying centered on Jesus. You'll do good theology if you keep him in the center, in the middle, and recognize it's always about him. Now, it's easy to get distracted from Jesus and go in a different direction. It's so easy. We're all tempted. And some of us have a proclivity in one direction as opposed to another direction. If you go to the right, then it becomes about the institution. Institutionalism. Where your relationship with God seems to be totally within the context of the institution. Holy Mother Church, you'll hear that kind of language, which I like. I like Holy Mother Church, but you sometimes feel like people have more of a relationship with the institution of the church than they do with Jesus. Everything the church does needs to bring you to the center, to Jesus. That's the activity of the church. Some people go a different direction. Legalism and legalistic religion is deadly. Now notice I identified them with 4 New Testament parties. Institutionalism, I identified with the Sadducees because they ran the temple cult and the temple economy. I identify legalism with the Pharisees because they're depicted as people obsessed with regulation, where religion is boiled down to following rules, being good in the sense of keeping all the rules. That's legalism. The thing is, you could keep the rules perfectly and be a hateful person. You know? The law is not going to transform your heart. Neither is the institution. Only Jesus can transform your heart. So some people go in the direction of antinomianism. Antinomianism is to disregard, devalue the law, the moral law. And I put the Herodians there because they were rich and they were in, life was a big party. You know, life is about having a good time. And you see this on bumper stickers. The one who has the most toys in the end wins. You know, all this. So then there's those who are really into having. They have to have experiences all the time. You know, they seek religious experience, not for the sake of Christ. They're not seeking Christ. They just want to have a cool experience. And that's the extreme of mysticism. And I identified that with the Essenes. And then you can see there is as it goes around the circle, all the various different types of things that happen between these these polar opposites. Do you like this chart? Do you like charts? Oh, okay. You know, by the way, there is various spiritualities within Christianity and in Catholicism in particular. One spirituality is called social justice spirituality. And Jesus was about social justice. But it can't be an end in of itself, and it cannot displace Jesus, because then all you have become is a social reformer. And I've seen Christians go down that path. It's all about social justice. And the only time they look at Jesus is as an example of someone who stands up against injustice. Well, Jesus did do that. Yes, Michael.
Looking at the Protestant tradition, you know, or especially United Methodism, one thing that we observed was that a lot of the ministers that came into the church professionally, if you will, in the late 60s, early 70s, did it because of that. It was a vehicle to change the world through social activism.
Right. It was called the social gospel, by the way, in the early part of the 20th century. And so what happened is that Jesus was sent to the back seat, and now what was moved into the center was the social justice. The problem with social justice is that ultimately it leads to Bolshevism. You know what Bolshevism is? Communism. It will. Because communism, its ideology is all about equality and the equal distribution of all resources, having a just society like that. Well, the problem with Bolshevism, it has to be done by eliminating all the greedy people. Then you end up killing everybody. That was the problem. You couldn't implement it because, and they ignored the fact that that we all are greedy. We all, they wanted the perfect society, but they had to get rid of all the imperfect people. Well, that meant everybody eventually. Yeah, so it doesn't work. But Bolshevism is social justice spirituality out of control on steroids.
Liberation theology.
Liberation theology tends towards that. It's social justice. So,
and there's a need for social justice.
Exactly. It's not that there's something wrong with social justice. It's there in the gospel. But it can't be the center. It can't be the criteria. It can't be the God we worship. So the God we worship is the person of Jesus. And if you say centered on Jesus, then you're going to be balanced with just enough institution. Because you got to have institution or organization. I mean, St. Matthew's is an institution. You're going to be balanced about social justice because the gospel and Jesus wants us to be fair to one another. And so on and so forth. Okay. So,
quick question.
Yeah.
I know what ultramontanism is. I know that it got its name from over the mountains where Rome is.
Yeah.
That's different from Montanism, and I don't know what Montanism is.
Oh, yeah. Montanism was an early, I'll put it this way because I think you can relate to it and I can do it simply. It was an early form of Pentecostalism. It was about, it put its emphasis on having an immediate experience with the Holy Spirit, and then people were, in the Montanist movement, were looking for new revelations and prophecies all the time. And they got crazy. It is charismatic spirituality out of control into the craziness. Does that help?
Yeah.
Or is that unfair? You think I said?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't. I don't want to be too harsh or critical because I have a great deal of respect for Pentecostalism and the charismatic renewal. I've had those experiences myself, so I'm not against it. But I've seen people who go to it into an extreme, and it becomes all about that.
Were the Port Royalists Montanists?
No, they were. Well, they would tend towards mysticism. They would tend towards this side of the graph. So you can place yourself on this graph, what you tend towards.
Yeah.
And you can also see different forms of Christianities or Christian friends that tends towards it. Do you see up here biblicism? Very close to legalism, and it's very close to apocalypticism. That's the tendency of Calvary Chapel and your friends.
Yeah, I've identified with it immediately.
Yeah, you saw that. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is. Everything's so literal and biblical and the connotation they refer to it.
So everything has to be biblical. So they put the Bible and they put it right in the center. And it's almost as if they're more interested in what the Bible says than what Jesus was about. It wasn't always that way because when I went to Calvary Chapel in 1971, it was all about Jesus. Remember those days? But it's so easy to get off Jesus and go into your particular area of your preference in one of these, and that's when you become an imbalanced follower of Jesus. How's this resonate with you, Tony?
I guess the only question I had or comment is, at the end of the day, when all this is done, is there some expectation that we are going to believe a certain way, or?
No.
I mean, do we have that freedom within ecumenical Catholic?
Well, there is a body of beliefs that we subscribe to, but each of us are on our own particular journey of faith, and we have to work through these kinds of things. And so what you're going to come out of this class is at least knowing what Catholicism is about. Whether you subscribe to everything that I say in this class, well, I wouldn't want that responsibility. You know, I don't want to be a leader of a cult where I have the final word on everything. No, this is going to introduce you to something, and then you'll be enabled to study more deeply these things and follow your heart. One of the things I hope that this course will do for you is to help you to fall further in love with the person of Jesus and want to be connected with Him in all things. And I feel like if you are, you can't go wrong.
Where would you put on this graphic people who are, for example, highly focused on like Mary or a particular saint or something like that? Is there a spot for that, or is it a subset of something?
Gosh, it depends on, because people have different attitudes towards Mary and the saints. If Mary is removed from her relationship with Jesus and seems to be like standing on her own apart from Jesus, right, I have problems with that. Yeah. I think you're getting off Jesus. Yeah. But I don't want to go as far as evangelicals go and say, they don't honor Mary at all.
Yeah, right. But some people take Jesus out of the center. They put Mary there, sort of. Maybe not.
We could put Mary. We could, as Catholics, we could put Mary in parentheses. She's kind of closer to the center. So, but I think we had a conversation. Steve and I had a conversation about this, and because he was engaged with some of his evangelical friends, and so and I think they were saying, why are you so into Mary? You bring up Catholics and they glom onto the Mary thing, and go ahead and talk about that.
It's funny. It's everything becomes a worship and not an honor. You know what I mean? And there's a big difference. Honoring the mother of Jesus is, I think, my position, and I think they believe because we do show such honor and respect that it borders on worship. And I argued the case. I think I did an okay job supporting the team here, but it was one of those things where it's really the conversation is, can you imagine knowing the sacrifice you're about to make and willingness to do it is a lofty responsibility, and I honor that.
In my limited experience with talking with people on that conversation, it seems like they inevitably pull a straw man argument where they take the very weakest part, the fringe element of Catholicism that calls Mary the co-redemptrix with Christ, which is a really fringe set of beliefs that's not mainstream at all, and they pick on that. And my response is, you want me to defend that? I'm not going to defend that. That's ridiculous. But do I regard her as the Theotokos, the Christ bearer? Heck yeah! Do I think she deserves special honor and respect for bringing Jesus into the world? You bet.
Yeah.
And she said yes for humanity. Right.
Yeah, that's good. I think is good theology. I think it is. Yeah, but I think in our conversation, when we were having this conversation on Saturday, Steve, you were saying, and then it was said, well, we can say to our evangelical friends, we love Jesus just like you love Jesus. We just happen to love his mother too. And what are they going to say to that? Oh, I don't love her. Then you got to take it up with Jesus. If you don't love his mother, you got a problem. But you notice remember the Passion of the Christ that came out a few years ago? And what's interesting is that my evangelical friends love that movie, because it really showed the whole thing. And they appreciated that very much. But I wonder if they caught how prominent Mary was in that movie. Because that movie was produced by a Roman Catholic. Or no, an old Catholic. what's his name?
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. And see, that's part of the Marian devotion because she was suffering with her son she watched it all. And that's how, I think that movie captured really the essence of how Catholics look upon Mary. She was suffering along with her son. Her heart was pierced with a sword, so to speak. And she watched all of that happen. And probably no other human being felt the pain of that moment. And that's why we honor Mary, because we know more than anyone else. Certainly all of us are sad about it, and the people that were there were sad about it. But, you know, a mother grieving her son's death, yeah.
Where was Joseph?
He was dead at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as we know. The last time we see Joseph alive is in that glimpse in Luke's gospel where Mary and Joseph they've lost Jesus. they go back to, when he was 12 years old. And then the only other reference to Joseph again in the New Testament is in the Gospel of John, I believe, where the critics of Jesus, the Pharisees that were arguing with Jesus, say, where's he? He's saying he comes from somewhere else. Well, isn't he the son of Joseph the carpenter? So they apparently knew who Joseph was.
Wasn't it common for older men to marry very young women?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Still is.
Depends how much money they have.
You know what? And that practice existed in our culture as recently as the 1800s in the 19th century. It's quite amazing. I have a couple of great-great-grandfathers living in the 19th century, and they were married twice. They didn't get a divorce. They had a bunch of children by their first wife. By the time they got to middle age, the wife died in childbirth. So he married again. Someone who was like 30 to 40 years younger, and had another bunch of kids. It was a different reality. And that was recent.
There was I've been listening to this thing on the internet about presidents. One president in particular had a similar story, but the long and short of it is he was fathering children from the time he was in his early 20s until he was, almost 60. So you had that span of generations.
But he wasn't using the same woman.
No.
Although he never got a divorce. I think you're referring to John Tyler.
I think so, yeah.
John Tyler had all these children. I think he had as many as, I think it was 2 wives.
I think he just recently, he was president in the 1800s, but he just recently, his grandson died. So he had a grandson living recently.
Yeah.
He was president in the
1840s.
1840s?
1840s, yeah. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
old goat.
Yeah, I couldn't handle that, man. Gosh. Okay. Well, we've run out of time. We haven't even got to the study guide, but this kind of introduces you to what we're going to do in the class. We'll pick up next week, and I really appreciate you coming.